It's been a year since I bought the FL5 Type R, and now it's time for an update video. And I'm warning you right up front, this is gonna be a longer video. It's gonna be more long-winded. We're gonna cover the driving experience on the street. I'm gonna talk about my lap times with this car and the Integra Type S when I drove them both, the pros and the cons of the car. We're gonna go in the shop and talk about the mechanical and technical parts of this car and some of the future plans I have for it. Along with the final thoughts, I'm gonna talk about my own philosophy with it and where sports cars are today. So I'm gonna start this off by saying I completely understand that a $45,000 Civic or a $40,000+ GR Corolla or an expensive STI, all these fun, like entry-level enthusiast cars have gotten to the price point of being unobtainable by younger people. And I was there and I look at this and I know this would have been my dream car when I was a kid, and I would just be like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to afford this with a bunch of debt. And you tack on dealer markups, it sucks. So if you do happen to make a stretch purchase on this car and you're really having a hard decision whether you wanna spend that kind of money and go in that type of financial hole to buy a car like this, you wanna know that you're getting a lot out of it. And this is one of the best parts, and why I preach this car so much is because I look at it as you don't have to sacrifice as much driving this as a fun sport car or sports car and take it to the track, but you can still use it every day. And if you have a significant other or family, you can still use it for that car. And that's what the Civic does of this generation so well. The exterior happens to match the interior as well. The design philosophy is more cohesive than the last generation, and that's one of the reasons why I got a red car, because of the red interior, it just matches better. So you feel the sense of specialness. You feel that Honda spent more time on design on the interior, making it more usable, simplifying things quite a bit. One of the things I love about it is the dashboard is smaller. It's like the older cars. The A-pillars are smaller, your visibility is better, and every single input here is all mechanical. There's no touch or swipe shit. It's all muscle memory. And it's done in a way, unlike some of the American manufacturers that build cheap cars, it feels like they literally sat there and like, how little can we spend on something like a knob or a switch, and everything looks like shit. And Honda did a great job here. You can clearly tell this was important to them, and you feel it in the driving experience, and that's also something I'm going to talk about in the shop, the mechanical part of all those details. So if you're buying this as a toy and a family vehicle, you can put 2 car seats in the back. I'm talking full-size car seats and still have room in the front. You can get in the back of the hatch and put all your stuff in there. You can fit basically everything because it's the size of a small CUV, so you don't have to worry about like, okay, I'm spending 45 grand, now I need a second car. You don't really need to do that, assuming you have the right tires on this for all seasons. The reason also that it's special compared to some of the competitors is the seats. Everyone that gets in this car agrees that these are some of the best sports seats of any sports car currently sold. There's no hard plastic, there's no carbon, there's no weird shit about it. It's just a great laterally supported seat and great vertically supported seat that fits and molds to your body. You don't have the fatigue sitting in it, and you have absolute support and decent adjustability. They look great as well. The carpets are red in here, which you know, is a blessing and a curse. It's something that I really like about it because it makes it feel more special, but it's also a curse in terms of, on the driver's side, you know, I have the extended Honda mats that go up a bit farther, but for the winter, I have to switch to Tuxmats because my dead pedal, around the dead pedal, is already staining the carpet because there's no coverage on there. So going to a floor mat like a Tuxmat covers all of it up. And then when I want to see the carpet, maybe in the summer when my shoes are cleaner, I can take it out and put the carpeted mats back in. But even that, you know, if you have kids in the back, you're going to need a full coverage mat up along the sides of them, crawling in and out. So it's one of those basically instant purchases you have to make to protect these carpets, because you don't want to be piling like, you know, toxic chemicals all over your carpet to like fabric guard to protect all that. Just put a mat over it, and when you're, at least when you pull them up, your carpet's going to look good. I also have a Honda trunk mat that says Type R on the back, so I don't forget what car I'm driving. But basically everything about this interior, aside from the infotainment is very slow. It looks horrible in here. It looks so generic. Everything else feels like really decent for the price point, including the audio system is very good compared to all its competitors. It's even tested better than the Integra Type S because it doesn't have the boomy bass, the bass elevation from the sub. It's more neutral and linear in here, and you couldn't dial out the bass in the Integra Type S. So this car overall is a really great experience for the price, but now I'm gonna really bore you to death and hit you with what Honda did with the mechanical side and why they did what they did in the shop. In this portion of the video, I'm going to talk about the technical and philosophical parts of the Type R and the FL5 Type R. This is going to be geared for those who already own this car or Type S and want to hear about it, those that are looking to buy these cars and really want the technical part of it, and of course, the people that think this is preposterous to spend $40,000, $50,000 on a front-wheel drive sports car. And I get all these angles, so I'm going to try to address all of those and also address the issue of why am I qualified to talk about this. And you may or may not have seen our videos, but over the past 3 or 4 years, we've had really exceptional access or unprecedented access to Honda and Acura as a brand. From North America to the factory where the Integra Type S is made, watching it get built from the ground up, talking with the engineer, the chief engineer of this car, going to Japan and talking to the retired engineers who made all the legendary Honda cars that people love and put on a pedestal today, from NA1 and NA2 NSX, the new NSX, the Integra Type R, the S2000, the CRX, and even more than that. And I think we have a really good perspective from the people who made the cars, what they thought about it, and where and how we got to this. So let's start with the philosophy of Type R. And Type R is interesting because in America, or North America, we've always had our different skewed perception of what Type R is and what we wanted it to be. You know, the Type R was always shrouded in a little bit of mystery, and I think that was on purpose. And we found that during the Type R launch of this car that we didn't really have all the technical information, or some of it was lost in translation from Japan to North America, and this is really common in the North American market with Japanese brands, you know, from Toyota, Nissan, you know, Honda. It's very similar. But I think Japan did a really good job at supporting this car when it came out, and of course we've learned more. The Type R is a brand that hasn't been particularly watered down over time, and you see this with other manufacturers where, you know, BMW with their M brand, they've put it on everything, right? You can have it on SUVs, you can have it on a wagon, you can have it on a car. And Honda hasn't done that with this. And granted, we haven't gotten the Type Rs maybe we would have liked, but their philosophy really has been, this has to have all the good things of a real sports car. Connectedness, driver feedback, mechanical feel from like a shifter, manual transmission, all distilled down into a package that is not just for the 3, 2, and 1% of people. We've driven better cars than this, no doubt. You know, we get into them all the time, and the argument is as well, why couldn't they do better? Well, when you look at some of these better cars that are $70,000, $80,000, $150,000, if you're coming out of school and you have debt, you have children, you have a family, you work nonstop, you know, having essentially a mortgage on a sports car is not the first priority. So Honda knows this. They've always had this in the back of their mind of how do we make a car where you can aspire to own it and use it as a regular car. And I talked about that on the interior. You already understand that. So what does that mean from a mechanical perspective? It has to be a GT car, and that's overused, but a car that you can still drive on the road and not feel like you want to get out of it, but also go to the track and feel exhilaration while setting a lap time maybe, or just enjoying the connectedness of the drive. So the magic of that is difficult to do at a price point. So the FL5, which is this generation, was started development right when the base FL5 hatch was being developed. So they took the base car, and it already had a really good platform to start with, which was greatly improved from the FK2 to the FK8. You know, all those manufacturing improvements we always talk about, you know, reinforced ring structure, stronger bulkheads, it's safer, more structural adhesive, more aluminum. They try to control weight by growing the size still. Every brand is struggling with this, and the Civic Type R is just the evolution of all of those same philosophies. So you start with a better body in white, and you take all the things that made the FK8 good, but you want to improve all these. So a lot of the focus was on exterior aerodynamics. The FK8 Type R struggled with the additive solutions of fake vents, some of the overstyling. While it was unique, they got rid of that. They reduced all that down. So you have very minimal fakeness along this car. It looks much smoother for that. You have wide body fenders now that are real wide body fenders with ventilation to reduce pressure in the panel area, to help airflow around the car, the way that the air flows around the side of the car, past the wheels. The opening of the front is functional for cooling, but also has the benefit of creating downforce in the radiator. You have vent work in the hood, again, to reduce pressure, to reduce underhood temperatures. So a lot of these focused areas were to improve the overall downforce in the car without creating a ton of drag. And because they did a lot of the developments on the Nürburgring, you're looking at higher speeds. And let's be honest, a lot of that is BS, because even in normal tracks that we go to, at least in North America, we don't have high-speed tracks like the Nürburgring. So a lot of that downforce is going to be lost at higher speeds because you're not hitting that. And also, we're mostly at tracks where you're dealing with more mechanical grip. So while a lot of this has been improved, including the diffusers, is more integrated into the bodywork, it's more rigid, there's a larger surface area. They've added these little laughable strakes or canards on this plastic, which you could measure with a millimeter ruler at a Cars and Coffee and brag about them. But a lot of it, again, is about the little tiny details that add up. So we know about aerodynamics, we know about the bodywork. Let's start with the front half of this car, and that is cooling. The FK8, the previous generation, struggled with cooling issues. So they made the front opening of the bumper wider, the upper grille area as well. There is a significant amount more airflow that goes into the radiator, and also helps to have that bigger opening. They could use more cores in the radiator. So the radiator is bigger, and also you have more surface area that you can hit with it. The fan for the radiator is also larger, so you have that, which puts less stress on the rest of the car. The air intake track has also been improved. It's more straight through, so the air through the intercoolers and all of that flows better. So again, the cooling response is better. And when you get to the underbody part of this car in the front, you have some key changes here to suspension. You're going to wider wheels and tires. So you have a 265 with squared tire setup. So they had to make some necessary changes to the adaptive damper technology and, of course, the kingpin access to stabilize the use of that tire. They've also had to make changes to the wheel design. While it has shrunken down by 1 inch, they changed the inner lip of the wheels to make sure that there was more tire stability by reducing the flex of the wheel. So by reducing the flex of the wheel, there's less distortion, and hopefully the contact patch is more better utilized in the suspension. So these little details here that they've spent their time on, along with the suspension calibration, is what makes this car special. So I'm going to talk about the suspension part of it. Now, Honda knew in the early 2000s they weren't going to be able to push past the 200 horsepower mark to front wheels. It was not possible with the existing technology, and with the dawn of turbocharged engines, it made things a lot more complicated. The big thing is moving back to a double wishbone suspension now is more expensive. It's more reserved for upper end cars. It also hurts packaging on compact platforms. So they didn't want to make the car smaller. They knew that because this platform had to be utilized for a whole bunch of different things, not just cars. So they had to redevelop the strut suspension on this car with the FK8, and it's been improved here, obviously. But this is something that you see that's more familiar with, like in a car like a BMW M car, something more expensive, or a Porsche product. Everything's all aluminum, either forged or cast aluminum in the suspension. And a lot of that is there, and mostly it's the rigidity through the front end of the car, and also improving dynamic camber change, something that struts really struggle with under load and high levels of loading, compression, and turning. So keeping the camber angle more neutral, more negative camber in corners, means that the front suspension has to do less work. It also means more stability, less understeer, hopefully, if you're not running the tires off the car. And then you have the camber stability and the stability in the front suspension to run the wider wheels and tires that they've offered here. So part of that is all in the front end along with a limited slip. But you can see the clever design of using 3 ball joints straight up. And like I said, the geometry has changed, but the lower ball joint, the middle ball joint, and the upper ball joint and the upright are very, very rigid. It's partly why you're feeling something through the front wheels into the steering, that connectedness on the front end that it's able to do. And also the reinforcement ball joint, or the reinforcement that goes from the lower control arm to the knuckle to help eliminate some torque steer or pulling on the wheel, something that would be very, very difficult to control in a regular strut car with this much torque and horsepower going to it. It's not perfect, believe me. Cold tires, you still get a lot of problems. It's front wheel drive issues, but they've essentially eliminated on the right tire, right condition, and when you're really pounding it. Now Honda has had to also connect all of that back to the driver through the steering rack. And the EPS rack received some modifications. And this is a sore spot for a lot of brands because there's a handful of electric power steering rack manufacturers, some good, some bad. A lot of times a brand will order a cajillion of them, it fits in their architecture, tie it in and try to change everything through software and bushings. So in a sports car, it's a little bit more tricky because you need some feedback without creating a ton of noise and vibration into the steering wheel and making it fatiguing to drive. They've also had to change the tie rod ends and the ball joint that connects it to the lower knuckle part of the car to actually steer. And a lot of these changes are made to reduce that delay feeling, that disconnected feeling or numb feeling. They wanted to improve reactivity, so a lot of that has to be rigidity. The next way to create a connection with the driver is a manual transmission, and this is something Honda has been really good at over their history. From the NSX, S2000, the Integra Type R, even the regular cars always had really good manual transmission feel. And the way they differentiated themselves is they know that when you make a shorter stroke shifter, shorter throw shifter, a lot of times it's at the expense of like shift force. And you see this on the American cars more so. The MT transmission of the Mustang is really egregious, or the TR6060 is way better, but it still requires a lot of arm force, a lot of mechanical effort to shift it. And Honda's really good at creating a mechanical connection without requiring all of that arm effort and just having finger feel shifting or wrist shifting where it's very precise and light without feeling cheap. They're really good at that, and it's all in the design of the assembly, the way that their cable design is here, and also improving some of the mechanical aspects. So the shift action between fourth and fifth is more straightforward in the FL5 Type R, so they made that improvement there. They've also made changes to the flywheel design to make that part lighter, and the bearing design of that. So the rev match system also works better for those that don't know how to heel to toe. So the rev match system is much more responsive, it's quicker, it feels more racy, along with the ability to really pull off shifts quicker up and down on this car have been greatly improved. Now the next thing is damper technology. They use ZF dampers here, and this is shared almost identically with the Integra Type S. Well, I don't know the difference in spring rates between the two. We know the hardware is almost identical, including the ADS modules, which are seemingly interchangeable between the Integra Type S and the Type R. That module can be swapped off the Integra Type S to this to change the voltage to the shock absorbers to give it a different, essentially, damping profile. So you could soften up these shocks if you find they're too stiff. What I will say is, from my ownership, because I'm not driving this car extensively, 12 to 15,000 miles a year, I found that comfort mode is exactly in line where it needs to be on a car of this type. Knowing and understanding the philosophy of what they wanted to do with tire grip, tire traction, and cornering feel, the way that they want it to be very immediate, the damping profiles really match that, and talking with the engineers about it, I get what they were trying to do. However, in the real world, when you're driving around on horrible pavement or pavement that's not the greatest, the car is overdamped in the FL5 Type R, at least this first iteration of it. It's very bouncy, and while it is somewhat comical and fun when you're turning and you just feel the car just digging in, it's not the most pleasant experience if that's not something you're keen on. So I think the Integra Type S does a better job in the tuning of those dampers. And I think it's going to be more accessible for most people that are driving this car. But it's nice to know that you can now make that switch. Now onto the engine, and I talked about the intake having a more straight-through design. That's combined with getting exhaust gas out, so the muffler design has been changed along with electronic flap. So this helps to improve flow and also cooling. Obviously, when you have the intake track going to the intercoolers is better. But they've also changed the turbocharger design, low inertia. They're trying to reduce the drag in the turbo, so they don't just have to throw more boost at it. You can add more boost and make more power, but it affects some of the throttle linearity and also throttle control. It feels more surgy and less direct. So they didn't want to just add more boost, so that's why they made the turbocharger easier to spin up. It's just more alive. In also changing the tuning, it does make more power. And when we did the dyno with the Integra Type S and this car, same day on 93 octane, You can see what they did in terms of the maps between both cars. Well, the Integra definitely makes more power. If you're on 93, it's going to walk away from the Type R in a straight line. As the cars heat soak on the track and you drive them harder, those differences become less apparent, and it's even more less apparent as you start to run the tires off on the car depending on your alignment. So again, it's more power, more directness, more connectedness, and every single corner of this car was slightly altered to make that mission possible, to make that feeling like you're driving a sports car that you're not spending an ass load of money on. So here's the last couple talking points, I promise. So braking system. This is largely carryover from the FK8 near the end of its production cycle. They went to a flat face 2-piece rotor, and this eliminates any cross drilling or slots, which is great because you don't get the microfractures you get with cross drilling or pad buildup that gives you kind of that sticky feel or vibration feel from the rotors. This is also great because these are relatively affordable to swap out, and there's replacements from like Essex brakes. It does not use brake-by-wire either, which means you can bleed your own brakes. It's just not an esoteric or weird setup. There's plenty of thermal overhead with the cooling ducts and the kick up on the back. You're not gonna have a problem with brakes on here, aside from maybe the fact that the stability control system is a little aggressive here. Even in Type R mode or plus R mode, when you turn off the stability, it's still dragging the brakes that get you to turn in. So it is hard on brakes also because of the weight of the car. It's just a bigger car overall. It's one of the negative attributes of that. The last part, and this is more controversial, is the sound. Honda looked at this car and they knew it does not have the sound of their old naturally aspirated engines. It's one of the big conflicts of moving to this next generation car. This is not trying to be the old car, but they still understand that people want it to be in some ways. So they looked at the tonal curve from the engine and the exhaust. And they looked at the old engine and they looked at and saw the K20, the turbocharged K20 from the FK8. There are these dips and valleys in the frequency response between the engine and exhaust, and that dropout or peaks. So they used the flap and the exhaust and changed the exhaust a bit to fill in those gaps. So the frequency response of what they were trying to achieve was much more linear. There were less peaks and valleys. Then they wanted to add the fake engine noise to fill in the gap of the upper end of the RPM band near 7,000. So you'll see in their graphs that they're like, okay, we're going to amp up the ASC, which is the artificial sound in the car through the speakers. And then they tried to fill it in to be like their older VTEC engines to make it sound like there's a lot more going on. And I'm just going to say two things. In their defense, modern turbocharged engines don't sound like anything. You have noise and sound regulation, so it can't be super loud. So if you're on track where you have the windows down, and a lot of track days they require you to have their windows down, and you're going past some V8 or louder naturally aspirated car, you don't hear anything. You literally have to look at the gauge cluster to see the shift lights of where you need to shift because you can't hear the car. So the fake engine noise through the speakers, although nauseating, it does fill in that and you can hear something that's going on. That's the only defense I'm going to give it, because even though on their graphs, when they did their audio testing, they can clearly tell, yes, it meets the frequencies that the older engines produce. It sounds so synthetic and fake that engineering-wise you can justify it, but reality is a different thing. It is just not good. There's better ways to do it, and it's going to require more of this and development time to figure out how to get the sounds more natural with the engine and exhaust. This car doesn't have the budget to do it, and you can tell. And really, that's where I'm going to leave some of this discussion in terms of the mechanical part. I hope that starts to fill in the gaps of just how much time they spent here. And again, also working against the budget and the deficiencies of a front-wheel drive platform. But I'm going to take this for a drive with Jack and talk through some of the pros and cons of what it's like to drive.
I'm sorry to interrupt this horrible video about a subpar 4-cylinder. I have instructed Mark to stop discussing Tuxmats and push the piano black. I was recently made aware of a giveaway for Tuxmats. What is disturbing is that Savage Geese has taken my trademark piano black and made it the code to register for a free set of mats. If you use that code, mark my words, I will see you all in court 47 years from now. Your choice. Tuxmats may protect your carpets from lobster, mac, and cheese, but won't protect you from my father's legal team.
Are you ready for this?
I am, Mark.
I've engaged bouncy house mode, which I never use. I've turned off traction stability control, and we're gonna see. Oh, do you hear that firing
I do.
up? The old VTEC engine synthesized through here is going to show you what the power of Honda is.
I can't wait. My jiggle factor is like maxed. It's like so over dampened.
Nah, this is totally normal. This is how you do it. So I spent a lot of time in the shop explaining why this car is the way that it is, all of that, and what I will tell you is that your Corolla GR doesn't have this level of pedigree, Jack. How do you feel about that?
I feel that outside of buying a GR Corolla for a long-term build series for our viewers, I would not own that car. I told you when we had the opportunity to buy this that if you weren't going to buy it, I was going to, because I think this car, outside of what's called inclement conditions, is better in basically every single way.
I also want to tell you that Honda supplied winning Formula One engines to championship teams, and that this engine is, they took this engine, replaced 100% of its parts, and then added 2 cylinders, and that's what's in Formula One cars.
All right, Mark, you've had this now for a while, and you know this isn't really about your experience with it, it's what this car is today. We've driven an Integra Type S as well, many different times. How do you think this car feels compared to a Type S, and what has it been like to actually live with a drive?
Well, you tell me how you feel about the Type S first.
I think the Type S, honestly, when we did our original piece on the Type S, I felt the only reason you bought that car, other than the fact that yes, it does have a distinctly different character and that it is more grown up, it's a little softer, doesn't have the boy racer seats and all that other fun stuff. The reason I thought that car would be great is you'd be able to get them. The reality is you can't get them, just like you can't get this car. And I think if you are playing MSRP to MSRP, the $10,000 delta that the Integra Type S has over this car is just not worth it. The seats in this are vastly better. I think this car looks better as well. And I like the fact that this is edgier for the track-related driving than you do with this vehicle, despite the Type S making more power.
Yeah, I know that they split up the production between the two cars, so it's about the same production level between the Type S and the Type R. And I guess the visual aspect of both of them is subjective. You know, I know a lot of people that don't like the way this looks and they like the way the Type S looks. But, you know, it goes without saying that they are very, very similar, and basically everything they do is very, very similar.
All the inputs are identical, just how the car is dampened and then the way your body moves around in the seats.
Yeah. This to me is more of an experience. I mean, but the reality is this is the hardest I've ever driven it on the street. I've never done this before. I never put it in Plus R. I never get out here and drive it, like, in terms of fun. If you're in California, you probably tear up the canyons in this, but when you go back on a normal road, you'd probably rather be in the Integra 7 out of 10 times.
Because it is substantially softer.
It is softer, and I guess even with the ADS module switch that people are doing, or you do better dampers in here and all of that, I feel like there's an X factor with this car, and I said it, the interior part of it, the seats, like you said, the seats are vastly superior. You have all of that going for you in here that makes it feel like a more special experience that you don't particularly use enough. So that's where the Integra really, and along with the tuning of the Integra, you get more torque, you get more power on 93 with that car. It's, I don't want to say it's better, it's different, but I would rather have this. That's why I bought it. I mean, if you put the two cars in front of me now and asked me which one would you choose, I'd still choose the Type R. I just feel like this is what Honda set out to do. It's like the Japanese last stand of Japanese front-wheel drive, internal combustion engine for them before they go hybrid. I like that part of it.
So I want to circle back to why we like this thing better than its competitors. Honestly, I'm still going to say it. The reason why we gave the Elantra N Car of the Year for affordable sports car last year is because it does most of what this car does for $10,000 less.
Yeah, agreed.
But the reason why I like this car compared to something like a GR Corolla, which is the same amount of money, is that I feel like it is a more focused product, and they set out better or more clear goals on what they needed to do, and it took a more iterative design perspective or process. They looked at what they screwed up with the FK8, and they fixed it with this car. And you can feel, versus the Corolla, that this is on a superior small car architecture. Aluminum front subframe, they fixed and they focused on all of the geometry elements of the suspension in a way that Toyota did not with the Corolla. And you don't have all the BS associated with that car, with suspension components literally coming loose because of the NVH, the front brake calipers sweeping or leaking. The car can't do more than 10 minutes on track because it overheats the diff.
Yeah.
Like all of those elements of that car, for what I like doing in vehicles, make it worse. But if you're on a road like this and it's wet, that car does a better job.
Yeah, that's the big thing. And I thought it would be more of an issue out here today because it's colder. And this car's completely stock. I didn't even pull the camber pins out of the front. And when the tires are cold, all it does is just want to rip you off the road and push off the road all the time. So you lose, like right now, the car is just like trying to jet off the road. It's part of its charm, I'll be honest. But it definitely doesn't have the all-season credibility. I'm gonna put this back in individual. I can't take the suspension anymore, but it doesn't have the all-season credibility of the Corolla, and it doesn't have a manual parking brake either, which is a big factor in the winter in a front-wheel drive car. Is you can really get over some of the push when you have the ability to rotate the rear end, and you don't have that in here. So as an all-season car, there's something to be said about having like a WRX or a Corolla, that this would get really, really old with the wrong tires on here.
Like if you live in Utah and you got to drive around in the snow belt, you're having a bad time.
Yeah, definitely. So as a summer, fair weather car, this is far superior in almost every single way. And you said it perfectly. The magic of the Type R is the iterative design, and I think Honda really, this is an important car to them. It's just a Civic, I know, but it's an important car because they don't have anything else like this. Where the GR Corolla is
just
we need something.
Yeah.
We need something because I don't want to be a boring company, And the same thing could be said about the Z. The Z is another one that's we don't have a lot of money to do it, but we got to do it. We want to do it, but it's not completely sorted out. This car is as sorted out as they could ever make a front-wheel drive car in this price point, and that's why I really like it. You feel it driving it, you feel it by looking at it, and you feel it mechanically, underneath. And that's why I own it, and that's why I would like to continue to own it. It's not something I would want to buy to flip.
I think the things that I appreciate about this car, it's got probably the best manual gearbox outside of a GT4 or a GT3 or a GT350. So, for $40,000, you can't really do much better. The front end, while it has new car problems with no steering feel, you get the mechanical feeling of the diff in the front end of this car. You can feel it pulling you through corners, a near perfect pedal box. And the 4-cylinder, yes, it sounds nothing like an old Integra Type R or like an EM1 Civic. You don't get the crazy VTEC changeover, and the fake engine noise is horrible, but there's a ferocity to the way the engine pulls. Yeah, it's not the most consistent power band, but it feels like it wants to pull the red line. It doesn't weirdly cut timing, at least on the street.
Yeah, especially on the cold and on 93, you can see the power consistency is way better here. And and that's the thing. That's another X factor of this car that I like about it, is you feel like you're engaged in driving it. I said this at the very start of this video. This is not the best car. This is not the best sports car. It's not the best driving car. There's things that are wrong about it. But when you drive it, you feel like you're part of the experience. Just enough of the front end pulling. You have to fight it a little bit. You have to work it. You have to, you feel the suspension working. You feel the braking working. Feeling like all these systems, all while the car is a part of the driving experience, where so many cars numb every single part of it out, where you just like, you mash your foot to the ground, the car just goes. That doesn't happen here. You really do have to work with it a bit, and it feels like there's more soul in the driving experience.
Yeah, I think it's a more frantic driving experience than you get out of most modern cars. Like, the front end is struggling to put its power down, it's pulling, it's pulling, it's pulling. You get a little bit, I don't want to necessarily call it torque steer, but the front end is trying to pull you through what little grip it has. That element of this car is, you know, exciting. And the rear, if you lift, will rotate on you.
Oh yeah, and it does. That's one of the best things about it. When you come into a corner and, you know, if I'm pushing and I lift, the car turns, it starts to turn in, where like your GR Corolla does not do that. If you come in a corner and you want to get rid of understeer and you lift out, it doesn't turn the nose in.
At least on a regular road.
I don't think it does it that well on a racetrack either.
No, I mean like a gravel it will,
okay,
or wet. But yeah, under regular grip conditions, that car is not eager to rotate like this is.
That's where I'm going to leave this video, Jack. I have the final thoughts where I'm going to talk about some of the philosophy of modern cars. But thanks for coming along for this drive and exploring the
Hondas, front-wheel drive,
like
four cylinders are just my favorite experiences. I'll always take this over a V8 and rear-wheel drive for the same money, Mark.
Well, if you're still here, thanks for hanging out for this long-winded discussion. I'm going to give you my own personal philosophy on this, of why we're at the place that we are with cars. And it's simply this. When the FL5 Type R was announced, I looked at it and I thought, okay, well, it's better, but when are we going to get a real sports car from Honda that's not front-wheel drive? When are we going to get a rear-wheel drive car that doesn't have hybridization, that doesn't have a million different systems like the old cars? And then I drove this on track. I talked to the chief engineer. I bought the car and I drove it and I really enjoyed it. But it wasn't until I got to talk to the retired engineers about the old cars that it really hit me. We're not getting an NSX, the old one. We're not getting an S2000 like the old cars anymore. If you want those cars, you have to buy them now. That's just as cut and dry as it is. Because I think the engineers in Honda understands that they made some great cars. They know how they did them in the era they came from. But I don't think, at least on the engineering side, they grip the insanity of the nostalgia for them. How people, at least in North America, have made them bigger and better than they actually are. However, while the new cars are objectively better, this car included, the new NSX is objectively better than the old one. The X factor is this. The reason why people like the cars from the 2000s and the 90s is because you could get in things like the Supra, the Mr. 2, the S2000, the RX-7. You could drive those around and you could feel something at any speed. You didn't have 10 different layers of insulation between you and the car. You didn't have all the technology and all the safety stuff weighing down the driving experience. So what you felt was a lot more in a good way. And yes, they were limited by tire technology and damper technology. They were far softer cars than they were today. But they knew how to use the body roll and the mechanical grip they had to make you feel like you were part of that car. You didn't need to be going 100 miles an hour to feel like it was a fun car to drive. That's all gone today. With the exception of a handful of cars like the ND Miata that is 2,400 pounds, but they've literally had to strip everything out of that car to achieve that experience. And there's something special about that. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is people want infotainment, they want sound insulation, they need a crazy amount of safety systems in cars. They have to take a side impact from a semi and you still have to survive. So cars are heavy and they're dead. And when they're dead feeling at lower speeds, the only way to overcome that is high horsepower. And that's what the brands have been doing. They've been throwing horsepower at it to try to get you to feel something. And then it's fake engine noise or sound or crazy exhaust sounds or whatever you want to add on and make it feel like you're doing something. But the problem, and it's even more so with the electric cars, is there's only so many times you can go 0 to 100 in 6 seconds because you can't utilize that speed on the street. To feel something, you have to be going to the absolute limit of what the car can do. And that is okay to a certain extent because there's certain cars that do it really well. They find a balance. But one of the things that's forgotten is to go that fast and have 5,000 pounds of weight in your car, it's going to feel good for like 5 minutes before you get out on track and you run the tires off. Don't care how good modern tires are. The physics of the weight will take that tire and that suspension and that car that felt good for the first 5 minutes, and now it's not working the same as it did when you first took it out there. Everything is falling off from brakes, heat soak on battery packs or engines, depending on the car, the transmission, cooling strategies come into play. All of that weight has a catastrophic effect on the way that these cars handle. And they are not good and they're not linear in their performance. It does this more so than the older cars did and the naturally aspirated cars. So you're fighting these counterintuitive things with all the electromechanical systems, trying to make it feel nimble, at least for a short period of time. They don't do well. So where does that take me on the Civic Type R? Well, the Civic Type R is trying to bridge some of that gap. It really is. Because when you drive it at a lower speed, much like the Miata, it's fun. It handles well. You can throw it in a corner of 20, 15, 50, and it feels like you're part of the experience. And a lot of that has to do with the attention to detail, things like the mechanical shifter, the nature of that, the way that the steering's calibrated, the way the suspension's calibrated. It all feels like you're part of that experience, and you're still not going 120 miles an hour. You can have that fun at the lower limits, and that's something that's disappearing. Is this car too big? Is it too heavy for a sports car? Yes, but that fall off that I was talking about happens far less than some of these bigger cars. So again, it's the last of its kind for Honda without being a hybrid or electrification. It still delivers the fun at the lower speeds. It delivers the practicality. It still delivers some of the refinement and the creature comforts, and you can take your family in it. It's really the ultimate in compromise of sports cars that does it well and balances it well, and that's why it's in my garage. Hopefully you find some of that information helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.